Well, you know it's you because listen, I'm coming in. I know everybody's like, why don't they say something? I'm not the one whom the Lord spoke to.
Oh God, here we go.
I'm not the one who has the fire of the Lord in their mouth today. Isn't that the right way to say it? Did I word that right?
I think so. Fire. You gotta kind of
Oh yeah. You got to ratchet it up.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not the one who has the fire
Yes, sir.
of the
You gotta
Lord. Yeah,
shake a
right
little bit.
there. Shake. I just did that so y'all can know I can still do it at any
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
At
yeah.
any time. I can pull it out. I heard Bishop Noel Jones say that one time because people were like being really quiet and not responding. And he was like, and the Lord said, and he said, just to let y'all know I can pull it out at any time. I'm gonna preach right now. But I can do that at any time. And then he said, and I think he messed him up because he's like, it's not really spiritual. It's just something I can do.
See, now you're about to introduce another topic.
I know, but
for
it
today.
was just it was funny. Oh, we're back.
Hey, everybody.
Yes,
What's up?
a little bit of a hiatus. Life. Uh, uh, Pastor Ben. I'm not gonna do that to you. BT3
I don't
had
care. I've been called worse.
yeah some successive events that were rather important on the scale. One being his wife's birthday,
Yes, sir.
high on the scale.
Yes, sir.
Second, his anniversary, which I believe was number 17,
17, my brother.
high on the
Yes, sir.
scale. Then
Back to back.
kids, back to back, same week actually.
Yeah.
We're praying for you because it happens every year.
Yeah.
And then kids getting sick, high
All of that stuff, man.
on the scale. So when life happens, we may take that, but we had some amazing episodes in a row. So again, and as a matter of fact, let me do this really quickly, just so you guys can know. Sometimes we forget. Watch this. Watch this magic. Boom. So you see that?
Hey.
The names just popped up. So if you don't know who we are, I'm Dan PD Thomas. I'm with Dr. BT3, the one and only.
What's up, everybody? What's going on?
And you already see the actual topic for today. You just may not know how we're going to approach it. But I believe it's going to be really good and you're going to learn something from it. And so, just to let you know, you'll see some changes to the show coming up that are really good. We're learning our audience. Hopefully you're learning us. But without any further delay, let's jump right in. I'm going to kick this thing and volley it right over to Dr. BT3. Man, start us off. Let's get into this.
So, what's up, everybody? I am excited that you're with us. You know that October is Clergy Appreciation Month, and we just came out of October. And so we saw all sorts of, posts, about, honoring leaders and honoring pastors and honoring clergy, past and present, and those sorts of things. And I think that is absolutely wonderful. I think that is amazing. I think it is warranted. I think it is good. But today we're going to talk about really how do we reform kind of how we deal with our leaders. Because what we're going to do today, folks, is kind of bring you on the other side of this conversation, on this side of the fence, as it relates to pastors and leaders and some of the things that we deal with, some of the things that we go through, because I think it's important that we kind of bridge the gap, right? Because there's like this whole, us versus them kind of mentality, sort of little bit when it comes to leaders and laity. So we want to talk about, leaders lost in translation. And this is another reason this is important is because we're coming out of this pandemic. And in 2020, 2 years ago, when everything started to unfold, a lot of leaders lost their sheep, not because their sheep were lost, is because their sheep left.
Wow.
So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about that today.
So I have a question, because I think there's always this tension between how much a leader can expect from someone that attends their church that God has set them over versus how much a person can expect from a leader.
Mhm.
And to me,
Yep.
oftentimes, not only does it seem imbalanced in terms of what is expected of a leader, but it also seems in terms of what we can expect from a member. I don't think I've ever seen a solid balance as it relates to healthy expectations. And it
Right.
seems that those expectations are not healthy because things have never been communicated, or they've never been communicated properly, and proper expectations have been set on biblical standards and what the scripture says. And so there's always this unsaid tension. And then when the tension is said, it's normally said when something erupts negatively in the
Right.
relationship. So how do you what is the expectation on both sides? How do we look at this?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's a great place to start. And it's a really interesting place because it happens so often to a lot of people. And I'll be the first to tell you, I haven't always managed it 100% correctly.
Mhm.
I just want to make that clear. Like, I haven't knocked the ball out the park every single situation all the time. Um, but I think it is important to really take the time to, like you said, we have this conversation. And for me, when you use the word expectations, those are things that have to be discussed as soon and as early as the connection and the relationship begins to happen. In the olden days, and you remember this, if you joined a church, before you could join a church, you had to have a letter from your previous church before you can join a new church. We need the church you were coming into, the pastor needed to know where you coming from. Does your pastor know why are you leaving? What do we need to know about you? Like, that stuff was like, I mean, it was hardcore. But what it did do is it prevented a lot of confusion, and it kept a lot of people from just leaving and being willy-nilly and doing stuff, because they know, if I'm leaving this church to go to that one, those two pastors are going to have a conversation about the type of member that I've been.
And I think you bring up an important point. And I'm open to be corrected. And I stand, as a pastor, in the same boat as you, not having always managed that tension correctly. A lot of it was because I didn't know, and a lot of it was because I took things personal when I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the nuts and bolts of it. But you bring up a person leaving a church, and I know there's more that we're going to talk about, but
Yeah.
since you mentioned that, I just want to go into that. And so, some advice I had given someone one time, they go to a church where on a Sunday, sitting in the seats, there's over 2,000 people in the sanctuary. Now, they're not a leader. They don't have any management or responsibility in the church. They come and they receive. And I don't think that it's not because they don't want to be involved, but the places they are involved in are at a minimal level. And so they were asking me, hey, it's time. I think it's time for me to go to another church. They've been there about 5-6 years, something like that.
Yeah.
And I believe I've learned all I can learn. And of course, I didn't delve into that because that's going to be your decision. And they said, but I'm going to tell my small group leader and the person I know that one of the pastors that I'm gone, because they've been raised like what you just talked about. Like, you either come by Christian experience, you come by letter,
Yeah.
or but this person wasn't looking for a letter, but they wanted to be released because this is how they grew up. Okay, I said, I think it's dangerous for you to do that at a church that large. And they said, why? I said, here's the reason. What I've learned is that in large churches, because there are lots of people, they've almost mastered people coming through the front door, but sometimes there are lots of people leaving all the time too, that if you go and say, because maybe those leaders' hearts have been calloused so much by people leaving, they become indifferent to it.
Right.
And if you go up to that person and say, hey, just wanted to let you know, I found another ministry. Thank you for what you deposited within me. You may get your feeling hurt if they act like it doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
I said, because what you're dealing with, and we spoke about this earlier offline, about it being biblical versus ethical.
Yeah. And see, and then, because when you start talking about, okay, what is ethical, that begins to delve into a person's home training.
Mm-hmm.
That begins to get into their upbringing. That begins to get into their personal sense of character, their personal sense of manners, and that's why I said, maybe they didn't even maybe they didn't grow up in church. Maybe they didn't, maybe they don't know. You know
Yep.
what I mean? And every church has its culture. And this is why I said, when you are coming into covenant and or relationship with a pastor or a leader from Jump Street, there are expectations that need to be discussed on both ends. Because, for an example, with your example, if someone says, "Hey, Pastor, I think it's time for me to go to another ministry. I think I've learned everything that I needed to learn, and my season is up." They those infamous words, "My season is up."
His season, yeah.
If the conversation was had when they came about what are your expectations, what are you looking to learn, what don't you know, how do you know you're growing, if those sort of standards and litmus tests aren't put in place, then it's easy for "my season is up," or "I think I've learned everything," or "I'm ready to go to this other church," becomes a very vague and nebulous type of conversation if we never knew exactly what you were looking for when you came through the door.
Man, and maybe they didn't. In a smaller church atmosphere, me personally, as a pastor, I have a philosophy, and that is this. So let's say a leader comes to me. The person I described wasn't a leader in any facet of the term. But let's say a leader comes to me and they start the conversation saying this: "The Lord said, it's time for me to go." And I know you're putting your head down, you're taking your glasses off. I understand. Because at some point, as pastors, we have to learn how to protect my heart and our hearts. And I'm saying this right now, prior to what I'm going to say, what I would say to a person who says that, because I think that's also something that I haven't done well. It's not me taking it personally. I'm
Right.
just not, I wasn't familiar with how it would affect me when someone who is needed, someone who's necessary, someone who's qualified, someone who's competent, and someone who's faithful tells me, unbeknownst to me at all, that the Lord said. And so I've developed this. Who can argue with the Lord? And before you say that,
yeah.
because if you approach the conversation with me like that, I have to assume that you don't want my feedback. You're telling me something that you do not want to debate about, and it doesn't even have to be a debate or discuss. I'm coming to tell you something. I'm not coming to you as my leader saying, "Pastor, I feel like this. I don't know if this is the right direction, but I'm asking for your help and want to give you the courtesy and the respect as a person who's been assigned over me by God to see if this is something that I'm feeling." Because I want people to know, if it's really God telling you, I'm not one of those people that says God has to tell me first. I'm not one of those people, but I can help you navigate through hearing the Lord if you would give me that opportunity.
And the reason I kind of shook my head a little bit is because, too, if we're just going to be 100% honest, which I think we try to be on the show, like I said, I said at the beginning of this, I haven't always handled myself correctly in these sorts of situations, but I think if we're going to be honest, it's a little disconcerting when we hear as pastors, "The Lord told me," or "the Lord said," only when it's time to break relationship and covenant.
Okay, I see where you're going now. I see where you're going. Yep.
It's like you've been in my office and we've had conversations about a struggle that you're having, and the Lord didn't tell you anything before you got involved in that. Okay. You're in my office and you're struggling with money, for an example, and you need gas money or your rent or whatever the case may be, but you didn't hear the Lord say anything to you when we were teaching a whole series on finances and giving. So all of a sudden you're completely convinced the Lord is speaking to me when it comes time for us to break relationship. Because per my experience, it's very rarely the people who are actually in engaged in enthralled in really, trying to do the work of the ministry, that all of a sudden they get this, the Lord told me. It's people who I haven't seen already in a while. It's people who have already kind of stopped giving. It's people who've already, and like you said earlier, it's like you had conversation with me about when you felt like it was the Lord, in some cases, to start a business. You said, maybe I feel like, can you train me? Can you teach me? When you wanted to do something that you thought would make me happy, I'm a little nervous. Can you show me how to do this? But then now it's something completely different. And now you're absolutely convinced, okay, the Lord is telling me it's time to leave. It's a little, we struggle with that as pastors, if we're going to just keep it 100.
And I think it needs to be said again. I know I'm not like this. I know you're not like this. I'm not a person who's presupposing that every person who leaves our church, I will know first. That's
right.
Like if you have 5,000 members,
yeah.
that just doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
If you got 5 members, it doesn't make any sense at all. Most people don't know that pastors, we're always responding and reacting to things. We don't know things until we know them.
Yeah.
A lot of times. It's not saying that God doesn't ever speak to us. I've had times where I just knew something was going to happen. I had a dream about it. I picked it up. I sensed it. Sometimes it's spiritual. Sometimes it's just being able to read the tea leaves, to be honest with you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like some things you're completely blindsided by, and then other things it's like, yeah, I was just waiting for you to come and say this.
But I'm going to say this: if you're in a church that's mid-sized to small, and you play a significant role in that ministry, just to up and leave from an ethical standpoint is just not good.
Even jobs, secular jobs, you have to put in a 2-week notice.
Yeah, and if you don't, it's going to follow you.
Yeah,
it's gonna follow you. The thing I think about pastoring and pastors being lost in translation. There are some things and then there's some things that people can tell you, and then it makes you feel like you never knew the person at all.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to trigger anything, and I want people to know this particular episode, we're just keeping it real, because this often doesn't happen. This is not us crying or bleeding on you or anything like that. We're totally indifferent to that. That's not what this is. I'm just telling you that the responsibility to keep your heart uncalloused by the situations that can happen in a pastorate successively. Because many times when it rains, it does pour.
Yep.
And you have to keep your heart available for the next person, consciously not trying to make them pay.
Right.
For what someone else did is a larger task than you can ever imagine. I'm just telling you. Most people, here's what most people do. But you're the pastor, though. You should be able to do this. You should know this. You're Superman. Isn't that what pastor is? Aren't those terms synonymous? Superman and pastor. And I will tell you this. Someone asked me the other day, they said, what is the thing that you wish that people would have told you before you started pastoring? We know that they told you some things, but what didn't they tell you enough of? They didn't tell me, first of all, that pastoring is not preaching.
Right. 100%.
That's number one. 2, I don't think I ever got enough conversation about how spiritual this really is.
Yeah.
And the attacks that can come. 3rd, you actually need to be, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to preach and teach. We know that you and I both hold that in high regard, but you need to be a better leader
than preacher.
Yes.
100%. 100%. I think you didn't say it like this, but what you were saying infers this, that people have this mentality oftentimes that I can vomit all over you. I can say whatever I want to say. I can do whatever I want to do. And you've got to handle it and deal with it. And you can't respond to me with the same level of energy simply because you are the pastor.
Yeah.
And listen, and let's just keep it 100. And that's where I think a lot of people are, even if it's subconscious. I mean, nobody would just come out and just say that per se, but I think it's a subconscious thing. Well, you're the pastor, and yes, to whom much is given, much is required. But I think sometimes we cause a lot of damage. I know a lot of times we cause damage within the kingdom because we don't know how to handle and receive each other. I think we've got a lot of leadership training, and I've talked this before, but we don't have much followership training.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think there's like more. Okay, I think there are unhealthy expectations on both sides.
Yes.
I really believe that. So people think that pastors are to be at their beck and call, and that's not true.
Right.
Because that person has a family, whether they're male or female, they can't and should not be more there for you than they are for their family. And people will prop you up. They'll be like, he's the greatest preacher in the world. He's the greatest leader in the world. And then that person, because they're getting that kind of affirmation, will sacrifice their family on the altar of ministry. And then you'll receive that slander. Look at your daughter. How is she like that? Look at your son. Look at your wife. Look at how they respond, because it was a role mix up.
Dude, I've said it for years, man. For years, I put EC in front of LM. I put my church in front of my wife. And there were times when, and just transparency, we would have our, anniversary services, or, we'd have, a prophetic weekend guest speaker or whatever. And I would be so enamored and so caught up in the activities of the weekend, I would leave church, wouldn't even tell my wife we're going out to eat and doing this. And she's walking to the car by herself with my little son. And that was wrong of me.
Yeah.
That was out of order. That was no bueno. That's not good. And so, to your point, a lot of times people will, have these expectations of you, and you're supposed to be this and you're supposed to do that, and da 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 da. And I hate to say this because I don't want to give off the wrong impression of what I'm about to say, but I feel like, okay, well, I gave $50 in the offering today. My $50 means that you need to pick up the phone every time I call you.
Now you're making me even appreciate more something that I'd experienced. So when I moved from Oklahoma City to California in the fall of 2002, September 2002, I ended up attending, we were dating at the time. I was going to another church other than my wife, but I ended up attending her church, became the drummer, didn't tell anyone I was a preacher. Then they found out. Next thing I know, I'm over to young adults, all that great stuff. And then, of course, completed my ministry time there in California before we moved back to Oklahoma City, and now in Texas. All right. So I remember the pastor there, God bless his soul, Dr. Bobby Kane. He said, hey, I want to tell you a few things. He says, we only take up one offering at this church. And he says, any offering they take up in Sunday school is for the Sunday offering. We will never come back. He said, you can't raise money at this church. He said, God has blessed you with a job, so you need to give, be a giver. The only people who can raise money are the people who can't get jobs now, and that's children. So he was very strict on that. Then he said, listen, between the hours of 7 and 9 on any day of the week, don't call me. And I was like, okay, why? He said, because I'm with my family. He said, you will notice that we will probably have less than 5 events on a Friday night, because I've taught my church for 35 years to spend time with your family on Fridays. He said, so most of those Friday night services is probably going to come from your ministry and the young adults. He said, but don't do too many of them, because if you do, I'm going to start blocking some of them. He said, because even though you don't have a family, he said, you need to respect those who have one. He said, that's the way we do it at this church. And I appreciated that from the get-go. He set the conversation and the expectation from the beginning. We don't run around. He said, I got about 2 or 3 friends. that we go in fellowship with every year. We don't do the playback system. You give me your $200, I'm gonna give you my $200. You know, he said we don't do that. And I realized that that's why this church is debt free. I realized that's why this church is, you know, is strong. Like people were really Bible listeners and applied it to their life. And 65-70% of the church was on the affluent side because they had boundaries. They had boundaries and they had things, and he had set the expectation from the beginning. And so I was there for 9.5 years.
Wow.
And so what I'm saying, the reason why I brought that up is because people feel pastors should do this. Then we think that sometimes members know. And here's the problem. There isn't any conversation going on. I'm going to tell this next little story. I'm going to leave it alone. At our church in Oklahoma City, we had gotten to the point. It had gotten to the point. Nobody knew. God had given me a great new job. So I was working while pastoring. Yes, that's still a thing. It's called bivocational, folks, right? So I'm working every day about 10, 11 hours a day. And I'm working for a university. Matter of fact, I got the pullover today. I got it on. And but people were barely giving. And when I say barely, we had a Sunday where the offering, and if you can believe this, was 1 cent. That was the offering.
All right, I'm out of here. I'm done. This conversation is over with.
I looked online to see. I said, okay, I know it was 1 cent that came in. And I looked online to see if anything else had come in. No. And then the next Sunday, it was $1. We had 2 Sundays back to back. So I had been paying the bills. I hadn't even told my wife. I'm just telling you stuff that I did.
I'm just telling you now, I'm offended.
Yes. So I've been paying the bills, including the rent for the church, for about a year. Wow. And I hadn't even said anything to my wife because you're so afraid as a pastor that people will leave because you're trying to meet expectations that even the scriptures don't validate.
Come see, we gotta let's deal with it, like seriously, because because here's the thing. I say this to the glory of God. I don't say this to boast or to brag at all, but when we were still in our traditional, church setting and other stuff, my wife and I were the biggest givers. And I'm in full-time, what we call full-time ministry. I was not bivocational. Like everything I did, and so there is an element of frustration that leaders oftentimes can begin to develop when it's like, not even like, when they have sacrificed money, time, energy, effort, time away from family to people, for people. And yes, we say, well, it's for God. Well, let's be 100% honest. It is for God, but it's really towards you.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying? Like, yes, we know God and God called, and yes, we understand that. But the truth of the matter is, God doesn't need a building. God doesn't need wisdom and advice from me. God doesn't need $70 for your light bill. God doesn't need those things. You do. And so God called you as the pastor, as a leader, to serve the people of God as a gift to them. So let's just keep it a buck. It becomes difficult in the face of all of the sacrifices that leader is making, and then sees that you're living your best life on social media and you're not even helping contribute to the ministry being sustained financially. That's a challenge. And most leaders don't have the maybe the grace to say that, or won't say that, but no, we see that and we feel that.
But it's what Paul said.
It's hard.
It's what Paul said. Paul said, it's my right. Let's go back to the giving thing. Concerning giving, Paul said, it's my right to ask you, because they that preach the gospel should live by the gospel. He said, it's my right. He said, but so I won't bring reproach to the gospel in your eyes. I won't ask you for it, but it's my right. And he said, you should do it. And then he gave them an example of another church that was doing it. He says, and I say this to your shame.
Yeah.
So there are many things that we want to say. I hear people say this all the time, and it's kind of comical, but I just want you to hear our hearts, because I don't think that people know the difference between a good pastor and a pastor that's not so good. I don't think they know the difference. But I hear this, people, they say these things all the time. Pastor, I just really want to know what you're thinking. And I'm thinking, while you're saying I want to know what you're thinking, you don't want to know what I'm thinking. You really don't. Because if I didn't have any discipline, if I didn't have any knowledge to season my words with grace, if I didn't love you, if I didn't check and screen my thoughts before they came out of my mouth, you'd find out some stuff that you would have said. I'd never want to find that out. But it's understanding people. It's caring for people. It's being empathetic for people. It's understanding what people can handle and what they cannot handle.
Yeah. And watch this. And sometimes getting that wrong.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because sometimes you think somebody can handle something and they can't. And let me take it a step further. And they don't always circle back around to tell you that they couldn't handle it.
I had a lady, and the love her to death, had a lady in our church. This happened to me almost a week and a half ago. She inboxed me. She comes to a ministry that I still do in Oklahoma City once a month. And she says, when you were here, now it brought me to tears. She says, I did not support you like I should have.
Wow.
Is what she said. And she says, because I couldn't understand where you were coming from, what you were preaching. She says, but everything you're saying is life to me. It's like water in the desert. She says, I know you're not here in Oklahoma. She says, but I'm coming to everything that you said. She said, I missed it. And, and I said, I missed a lot of things too. I remember I had this one slip up. I remember, oh boy, I tried not to let anything come out of my mouth. It slipped up one time. I had a member who was leaving for what I felt was erroneous reasons. And we had reached out, my wife and I, to try to help the situation. My wife had went through a similar situation, but this person was saying, hey, I just need to get away. I need to get away. It's too great. And we were like, but we're here to help you. And of course, I didn't say any names or anything like that, but I said something like, sometimes people will just give you these reasons. And I just wish people would just tell the truth, and I'm like, and when it came out of my mouth, like I shut it down right then. I was like, okay, I'm not saying anything more. That person was out there. I was like, because really that's not me. That's not me. And we mentioned earlier that there are some things that we decide and we know, either just by doing this for a while or by unction of the Spirit, hey, people can't handle this right now. But I've also made the mistake, and there's a big one, where I needed to say something to a person and I didn't. And I let it run on too long, and it ended up ruining culture.
Yes, that's you just described for me a season that we went through, like right before the pandemic. Like that, what you just said, instead of handling conversations through coming through the front door, when you're hearing stuff and dealing with, instead of just being confrontational, which I think is a cuss word in the kingdom that a lot of people,
it starts with a C. So,
what'd you say?
It starts with a C. So I guess,
well, but you're absolutely right, because it goes back to something you said earlier. I wish that we would have had more teaching training on the fact that being a pastor is more about being a leader and less about being a dynamic preacher, because being a better leader requires hard conversations, requires confrontation, requires that you do and say things that may not always be popular, but you've got to be okay with it because you are the leader. And we have to teach our people how to respond in that way. And I mean, you and I, been around for years. And there are times, you know, when you have to ask, you have to say to people, maybe this isn't the place for you.
Wow. I've had that conversation.
Yeah.
And it was a little more direct that day. And I think it was I told this person, I have now become a connoisseur of courageous conversations.
Yeah.
And I said, here's what I'm going to say, because they started bringing some things up, and I said, you know, we're not going to go into that because that's fodder on the fringe. I said, here's my recommendation. I love you. You've been a friend for a long time. We are in two different fraternities together. One was Christian, the other one was, I said, but here's the thing. I said, you need to find another church. And I told him that. And so he says to me, and just giving y'all transparent game today, we just being real. He said to me, I don't think we're on the same page. I said, no, you're not on my page. Because at that point, I'd had enough. I said, and guess what? I said, I don't even have a page. It's the page the Lord gave me. And that's the one you're not on. And I said, I think that you're coming. And I said, here's the issue. You came from another church. That church did great things in the community. But what I failed to do was to make sure before I made you a leader that your lens had changed. I said, when you go into an optometrist, no matter what optometrist you came from, they give you an eye test.
Yeah.
Because they're now responsible and liable for this. I said, I didn't give you the proper eye test to make sure that you knew my head, what I thought about this vision. You knew my heart, what I felt about this vision before I put anything in your hands. The reason why what you've been doing doesn't look like what I think or what I feel, I said, that's my fault.
And see, what you're describing is another nuance that I think we need to discuss too, is how do you pastor people that you've known before you started pastoring? How do you lead people who knew you when? How do you shepherdize people who you
I like that word.
You know, who you went down the slide with on the playground. Like, because those things are difficult, because people will pull that card on you. Well, I know you the pastor, but I remember you when. Now don't get too big for your britches now, because you and they use it as a trump card, you know, to throw out, you know, when it gets a little hairy there, you know.
And that's manipulation.
And I was just about to say, and that's manipulation. But watch this. It's not just those people who manipulate the pastor. It's the people who withhold their giving. It's not just that. It's people who, when the pastor's preaching.
I'm going to make a parallel.
It's all of that stuff it's manipulation to control the narrative, to control the pastor. And so the question, like, I'm not your leader if you feel like you have to control me.
It's no different. And I'm not putting on one side or the other. And somebody's not going to like this, but I'm used to it now. It's no different than what Paul says when a husband or wife withhold the coming together of their bodies.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the adult maturity to discuss it. It's the same thing. I've had one good experience with this, bro. I've had one good experience with this. I have a friend, and he's been the best friend for 30 years, since 1992.
Wow.
And just had breakfast with him this weekend. Hadn't seen him in a while because he'd been traveling for work. And so we sat down together. We were like, man, where did 30 years go? You know, we're trying to figure it out. And so I remember when I said, hey, man, will you come help me out, come build this church? About 6 months in, he pulls me to the side. I may never have this happen again, but I appreciated him doing this. He says, I'm struggling. And I said, man, what's going on? We moved to a more quiet place in the church. He says, I'm having trouble making the distinction between you as my pastor and you as my friend. I need your help.
Yeah.
And we talked about it until we got on the same page. And he was solid there until he left, you know, just completely solid. And I appreciate that. Most time people keep these things in their own mind, and they'll tell other people they won't tell you. But I will say this as a cautionary tale: if you believe that God is calling you to pastor, great, awesome. We need pastors. We need shepherds to lead people to green pastures. We need that. But if you are not willing to know that every weekend you preach, that somebody is having you for lunch after church, don't do it. It's happening every week, and you need to know that. You need to know that you are the central subject at somebody's dinner or lunch that day, every week.
You got to know that, and I'm glad you shared that story with your buddy that you've known for 30 years, because he, like you said, he was mature enough to go, help me to not lose you in translation.
Yeah, there's,
help me, because I see where I'm headed, but I don't like it, because I know it can be something that's detrimental. So help me before we crash this thing and it becomes something that we don't want. And I've had a family member, at my church, and who I grew up with, and so thankfully I think we navigated that very well. There are times when I'm like, okay, and we've had our own little, sayings and our own little trigger words to let, okay, here's what I need right now. I need to speak to the apostle. Okay. I need to speak to my family member right now. And so you got to learn how to put on different hats, but that requires maturity and communication. That requires someone being able to be humble enough to say, this is where I'm at. I see the bigger picture, but I want to make sure that while we are, in this same boat together in this ministry or serving together or whatever the case may be, that we can still have open lines of communication. And so it doesn't hinder what we're trying to do big picture here, because there's somebody in that congregation who doesn't know you like that. There's somebody in that congregation who has not seen you like that. And so you can, if that conversation is not had, you can damage someone else's ability to hear from God through that pastor, because they see how you interact with him or in that situation.
I want to, this is right on the tail end of what you're saying. This may be a shock to some folks, but I want to go ahead and say it. It's a few things I want to say. Pastors don't know everything.
Yes, we do.
we don't always make the right decision, and we make mistakes. And let me qualify this. Anytime you say pastors make mistakes, people always go to immorality. I'm not even talking about that at all. I'm nowhere near that. I'm talking about there are conversations that we may not handle right. There are times we get angry because people are not getting the point. We can be short with you. So just like you get tired of your kids asking you the same thing, or your kids doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting you to have a different response after you told them not to do it. Listen, pastors feel that too. Why are you still doing this? Why are you still late every week?
Let me give you Bible, folks, because what PD, what you're saying is so true, because I think we forget that God uses human beings.
Yeah.
And here is Moses, the one who talks to God face to face, who's a friend of God, like a real friend of God, not just a cute song, a friend of God, who gets upset at the children of Israel. He hits the rock. He was even driven to the point where he was suicidal. He was like, yes, just take my, like, Jesus Christ. I mean, Jesus wasn't around. Well, he wasn't around. Anyway, but right. He just like, oh my God, did I birth all of these people? They're complaining. I brought them out of Egypt. They complain about the food. So we got manna, and then we got quail, and now they want water, and then they don't say thank you. They don't do it. OMG, like, oh my God. Like, so if Moses can have a moment, why can't your man or woman of God? And let me qualify, let me say it. Yes, Moses' moment disqualified him from the promised land because he didn't sanctify God in the eyes of the people.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. But why put Moses in that position with your hard-headedness and your rebellion? Why cause your pastor, your man or woman of God, to be in a position where they have to guard their heart and have to monitor their spirit and have to really corral themselves when interacting with you, when they've asked you to do something 2 and 3 and 4 more times? Why put them in that position where you keep struggling with the same thing over and over again, and they've given you wisdom, they've given you counsel, they've prayed for you, they've labored with you, and you're not receiving it, you're not taking it in, you're not using it? Brother, that's dishonorable. And then you position him or her where they have to now build boundaries, and now they have to question, am I really your pastor or your leader? Because you're not listening to anything that I'm sharing with you. You're not getting it. So now I'm questioning whether or not you should even be here.
Here's what the apostle to the Hebrews said, and I'm saying it that way, even though I believe it was Paul. But I know that there are people who've gotten it wrong for years and said it was somebody else. Anyway, here's what he says in Hebrews 13, verses 17 and 18. He says, obey your spiritual leaders and do what they say. This is from the New Living Translation. Their work is to watch over your souls, and they are accountable to God. Give them reason to do this with joy and not with sorrow. That would certainly not be for your benefit. Pray for us, for our conscience is clear and we want to live honorably in everything we do. This is all we're saying.
That's the episode. All right.
Right. That's you can't get any clearer than that.
Yeah.
Because I think that people think that they just want to rebuke, they want to retort, they want to. No, there's no joy in me having to correct someone.
No.
There's no joy if I have to go further and even rebuke someone. And the times that I've had to do it, that's my last resort.
And it's even that much more trickier living in social media world, because we know you say the wrong thing, whether it's in an inbox, a text message, whatever, that person can turn on you and repost it, spin their narrative, talk to everybody else about what you did and what you didn't do, and what you said and what you didn't say. So now it's like, okay, how do I pastor or rebuke or reprove or say what I genuinely feel God telling me to say that this person may not like, and then risk disobeying God and missing an opportunity, and then maybe being thrown under the bus or mischaracterized, and then everybody else may think of me something that is not true.
Which is why I think the King James version of that verse actually uses a better word. It just says, obey them that have the rule over you and submit yourselves. Because I believe that you can be obedient and not submissive. I really, just like you can obey and not believe. We see this all the time with children. You tell a child to sit down, and then they sit down and look at you like this.
Yep.
They're sitting down, but they're standing up on the inside.
Yeah. It's compliance. It's not submission.
Yeah. And so I don't think I think there's less, 1% or less of pastors are the bad pastors that you see on TV or hear about on social media. Because just about everyone, it's just like when people say, you guys are just preaching for money. Now, let me say this. I got to say this because we're keeping it. This is the 100th episode. We've kept it 100 every episode, but I hope we don't get in trouble by the, international, galactic pastors or whatever that thing is called. Anyway, but here it is. Every pastor, when you as a member come to us and we're doing all we can, every pastor I've ever met, especially when it comes to what preaching for money, we're the dumbest people in the world because ain't no money been made. You would think after 20 something years, you'd be like, hey, you need to go find a better job. If I, even the times that someone has paid me 4 figures or God bless me, do you know that if I added up every single message I preached in 24 years, it probably was $2 a message.
Right.
I mean, I mean, and bless God for the people who are able to walk in. God has risen them to the level that they are able to walk away with a $30,000, $50,000 check for 45 minutes. And you know what? I will never knock them for it.
Yeah.
Because whose marriage got restored that day? Whose soul got saved that day?
Right.
Who said I was going to commit suicide and then decided against it that day? What family hatchets were buried that day? What's the price of that?
Right.
If you gave me, I believe, if you gave me $1 million for an hour message and someone got saved, it's still not enough.
Right.
So that's not why we do it. We're in love with people. The challenge is that there's more grace flowing from the pulpit than there is to the pulpit.
Right. Oh, say that again.
There's more grace flowing from the pulpit than there is to the pulpit. There's nowhere even remotely alluded to God choosing perfect people to lead his people.
And let me just say this for the peanut gallery out there really quickly, because everything you're saying is right. And what we're not doing is we're not excusing foolishness from the pulpit.
Absolutely not.
Let's just be clear about that. We're not saying anything should go. There should be no accountability in the pulpit. That's not what we are suggesting.
Say it one more time. Say it one more time.
We're not suggesting that there should be no accountability in the pulpit and that pastors always do the right thing, because that is absolutely not the truth. Sometimes we miss it. Sometimes we do things we should not do. What we're simply trying to do today is balance the scales. What we're simply trying to do today is reform how we do relationship with our leaders, because it is so easy for laity to go, pastor hurt my feelings and I'm not coming to church. It's so easy for laity to go, I ain't clicking on the live today because last time he called me out. And it's so easy to go, don't they know that Thanksgiving and Christmas is coming up and they still asking for a sacrificial seed? They don't care.
Mm.
So easy to do those things when you really don't understand the heart and the sacrifice of, like you said, PD, most pastors are in it for the right reason. Most
that I meet, and
not
most,
all.
And most pastors quit because, well, here's a Christian counseling agency that I used to do contract work for in Oklahoma City. The president of that counseling agency, his name is Scott Haddon. I have to call his name. And I was talking about the financial challenges that I told you when I was paying for the church and other frustrations I have. He was counseling me, and I started doing that for preventative measures because I didn't want to take anything that I was holding in out on my church or my family. So it wasn't because something grave was wrong with me.
That was wise.
And he said to me, I was doing it for 4 years. I haven't found anybody here yet. But he said to me, he said, Dan, how can they know how you feel unless you tell them?
Yeah.
He said, I do understand that there's a risk that you may lose people because you're supposed to be a Superman, and you may be seen by some people who have those feelings about pastors, and that you may be seen as weak. He said, but wouldn't you tell someone that if they needed help and then they left the church, you would say to them, hey, you didn't tell anybody that you were in need, so how could we help you? He said,
go. You just brought something to my mind, and I'm gonna try not to get emotional talking about this. Some years ago, there was a string of pastors that were committing suicide.
Oh man, I remember that.
And I'm not talking about 30 years ago. I'm talking about like in the last 6 years ago.
Yep.
Like there was like a string of pastors who were taking their own lives. There was a young pastor, I think, in California, had a young family. I can't remember his name. there was a pastor, I think last year, who went viral for telling his congregation he was going to take some time away, and get his health checked out, and just really kind of get recalibrated. And when we applauded him for that, some people did, most people did.
Some of those comments though were,
yeah, most people applauded him for that. And I'm saying all of that to say, as we're kind of at perfect place to land, but it's hard not understanding that we're human beings who God uses in a supernatural way. And the way that you get the most out of a gift is by honor. You get the most out of a gift by honoring that gift.
Mm.
Does that mean sowing in financially? Yes. But that also means valuing their teaching. That also means honoring their borders and their boundaries that they set up to protect their mental health. It's not just money. It is money, but it's not just money. And you preserve your man or woman of God, who is a gift to you. When you honor them, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to drop the ball. But when you honor them, what God has put inside of them becomes accessible to you. And dishonor cuts that off, stops the flow, and begins to cause cancer in the relationship and the culture and in the community. I'm done.
I think that is the perfect place to land. And I think that all we're saying is that there is another side to this. I wish all pastors, and we don't have enough of this, and this could be another show, that when they made a mistake, they'd acknowledge it. That they wouldn't say, because I'm the pastor, I don't have to say sorry, just do what I say.
Right.
I wish pastors would practice, especially from that standpoint, what they preach, because you would cause healing in your congregation and avoid discord.
Yeah.
And division. And so we need to practice giving each other grace. Listen, if you got a pastor that cares for you, gives you a good word, is not scandal ridden, what are you complaining about? They were there when you were married. They were there when your loved ones died. They're there when you're hurting. Sometimes even more than their own family.
Yep.
I'm leaving. Why? Because you've got shiny object syndrome? The job, and I think every pastor I've known, I've got confidence. I know you have confidence, but I think this is something that keeps us humble. So let me just drop this in here in the last part of this. Pastors on a weekly basis deal with feelings of inadequacy. Mm-hmm. Because the job is so mammoth, and you know that it's not you that's doing it, it's God through you. And you're trying to manage that flow and make sure you don't get ahead of God, make sure you don't get behind God, besides yourself. It's something to manage.
Yeah.
You say, thus saith the Lord. You're trying to make sure that God really said that. And so what Paul says in verse 18, he said, and I'll end it here, pray for us.
Yeah.
For we trust we have a good conscience in all things to live honestly.
Yep.
Help us not to be lost. Again, folks, we are back. You can actually, if you've got questions, whether they're in agreement or not, we want you, some of you probably have already typed some stuff in here. We'll make sure to get back with you. But if you got a question that you don't deem to be needs to be public, you can actually email us at rtvintelligentchristianity@gmail.com. And we appreciate you doing that there. And then, of course, in the comments, you can keep the conversation going. But we're here every single week. I know we've been gone for a few weeks. So thank you for dedicating your Mondays to us for about 45 minutes to an hour. Anything else, Dr. BT3, or are we out of here?
We're out of here.
Man, yeah, we are out of here. Continue to pray for us. We're praying for you. Thank you for watching Reformation TV, where we are developing intelligent Christianity. See you next week.
Yes, sir.